All right. Here we are. It's another actually podcast, video argument, whatever this thing is called. And today we're talking about being wrong, which is only hypothetical for Brock. It's never actually happened. Um,
Um, actually,
well played. Well played. We're going to start with some of the concepts that were in chapter 3 of the book that we've been discussing, Think Again by Adam Grant, and the benefits of being wrong. So I'm going to start with the question, throw it out to the group. What was the time where you've been wrong and it has helped you?
I'm going to wait for John to answer that
I was like, I'm going to have to answer this one first, aren't I?
one.
I remember early in my consulting days, earlier in my consulting days, I was a big fan of, I was a big Microsoftie. I was all about .NET and Entity Framework in particular. And I remember another sort of actually geek type of person that we all know. He was telling me about why Entity Framework was bad, and that he used the term goop. It puts goop all over your objects, and in talking about all these technical concerns. And I remember I was fresh off the pain of not having something like Entity Framework, like doing things the manual way, like writing SQL statements and trying to parse those and get the string operations right. So, like basically cooking your own Entity Framework, ORM. And in my head, it was very much weighted like, I don't care about goop. I'll take goop all day rather than having to write my own plumbing. And I completely disregarded what he was talking about. And, a short matter of a couple of years later, I ran into many problems because of the goop and some things that I was trying to do in a more advanced architectural sense, trying to make the code more testable, more sustainable, and headlong into the goop. And I remembered our arguments, me and this guy, and just, I had this moment of, right, goop.
Yeah, I think one of the big ones for me is very similar. And I'll keep it kind of abstract, but it was a project that I had a chance to architect. And for me, the thing that I was wrong about was service-oriented architectures in general. Like, this was around the time that WCF came out, and I don't think WCF was necessarily the problem, but there was a lot of buzz about service-oriented architectures. And the system I designed was it was overly complex. And at the time, I just thought that I was doing like what was best practice and where the industry was going. And an interesting thing happened where we finished that project. I went and worked on other projects for about 2 years. And then this initial project had actually been financially very successful, which meant that it was now ready for a bunch of additional features and scaling and all those things. But I got to come back and work on this architecture that I had put in place. And it was a really good learning experience about where the value in software really is. Because I had clearly put too much value into a technology or into a pattern, which in this case was service-oriented architectures, which is nothing wrong with service-oriented architectures. I just put too much in that basket. And it allowed me to step back and see what part of architecture really provides value, what part of value allows you to continue to build and grow an application in the long term, and not just slap the most buzzwords onto a project.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that it sounds like your story and when your realization of where you had been wrong it was about a 2-year window, that's the same in my account.
Yeah. The other one, which is really different, and this is kind of funny in hindsight, but I remember first reading about F# when it was still a research project at Microsoft and reading some of the people that said that F# was going to be a very big deal. Like it was going to be as big of a language in the ecosystem as C# was. And I was a believer. I was convinced. And because of that, I invested a lot of time in F#. And that's never panned out. F# is now, it's a popular enough language. It has its audience, it has its ecosystem, and it's fine. But it never became what I thought it was going to be. But I think that was still beneficial. Like it was beneficial to go down that rabbit hole. It forced me to learn more about different kinds of programming languages and different paradigms. It also, I suppose, in other times, it was healthy for me to see that cheerleaders for a certain tool or technique or platform or language may overstate their case, or maybe they're wrong too and they just don't know it.
Yeah.
And so that is definitely something where I was wrong and better off because of what I thought for a while.
What's pretty great about, just doing this in this field in the first place is that it moves fast enough that we can actually see both ends of the cycle and learn from it, like as opposed to, something that maybe it takes 25 years to validate a marketing claim made earlier. And by that time, you're like done with your career and you're like, oh, well, I guess I wasted all that time.
Or have a bridge fail.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know bridges fail within a couple of years now.
Well, hopefully.
Thinking about Crimea.
Real fast.
It's a short amount of time.
Yeah. I
Brock,
think
you have something there, a time where being wrong helped you out in the long run?
Yeah, when I started doing unit tests, I really did not like them, mostly because naming them was like a completely foreign language to me, and writing that out. And so like my initial ideas about how you do unit testing and the way that you go about it was not correct. And working with people and starting to get into the pattern, I started seeing the benefits of it. And then a year or two down the road, I am going back and I'm making a change to this code that I wrote an extremely long time ago, and I don't remember writing the unit test or the code. And I go in and I make a change, and apparently I had thought ahead for something somebody might do one day, and I tripped that unit test, and it helped prevent me from making introducing a bug during a hotfix. And that is that was kind of the cherry on the huge sundae that is unit testing and having code that you can kind of prove out and give a gift to your future self. So,
I love that way of framing it, giving a gift to your future self.
Mm-hmm. I use that term all the time at work now. It's like,
awesome. Usually doesn't happen in code, but when you're unit testing, yes, you can give a gift.
Yes. Yeah.
Neat.
I also like using being wrong as a way to kind of feel out the bounds of an argument.
What do you mean by that?
So like sometimes I will try and see how far I can take the framing of an argument or a question and see how that sounds. And sometimes you can discover different areas of an argument or a discussion that aren't surfaceable if you are just playing in like the immediate zone of knowledge. But once you find ways to break out of that or think in a different way, it uh, it has helped me to no end like clarify like the universe of knowledge in which we're talking about, and I feel like I do that during like book clubs a lot, like just seeing, well, let's see how this saying lands, or see if I get something off of that, and that can be really motivating to kind of say, okay, well, if I'm looking at the argument like this, what if I go 12 and a half degrees off, to the right or left, and see what does that problem look like from that angle.
Because it
And
sounds a little like a combination between rubber ducking and being a devil's advocate.
yeah, I kind of feel like even sometimes just like saying stuff out loud, it sounds really different than what it sounds like in your head.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
And I love being wrong. It's great because I'm learning stuff all the time. If I'm not learning stuff, I'm stale, and I hate feeling stale.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be tuned to a crouton.
That's interesting. It's like, as far as the whole enjoying being wrong, that's a good way to, it's contrasting it with the feeling of just, I haven't learned anything in a while.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting stuck. I'm getting stale.
Yeah, and I feel like if I'm doing it in a public forum where there's younger developers around, being wrong or kind of showing, trying to think outside the box, it helps get them thinking, and it helps them think that, oh, well, if I just answered didn't explore the bounds out loud, like they're just going to think, oh, well, I'm not going to speak up because I don't want to seem dumb around me or something, or someone else that's smart in the room. We want to create safe spaces, or maybe not safe spaces, but like so I guess psychologically safe spaces. So to hear stuff like that.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like you're tiptoeing up to one of the big ideas from chapter 4 in the book, which is the value of disagreement. And Grant had a point in the book that there's a big difference between relationship conflict and task conflict. Relationship conflict is more like me calling you guys names. There's no real value in that, right? This is my personality versus yours, versus task conflicts, where we just differ on some technology decision. So I'm curious to know, like, how have you guys seen your teams benefit from healthy task conflict? Because I do think it gets into what you're just talking about, Brock, with this idea of modeling with your team that it's okay to be wrong. But part of that is modeling that it's okay to disagree and have different ideas. Because if everyone is at least out loud kind of thinking in unison or just going with the flow, then you're not going to come up with these more interesting ideas or these innovative out-of-the-box solutions. So you almost need there to be this psychological safety for someone to say, no, I think let's at least look at this. I think you're wrong. I think there's a better option. I just think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know that I have an example that would make sense in to just kind of throw out there outside of, like one thing that I had learned really, really late in my career was that the way that I show up in a room or in a meeting, people really respond to that. And a lot of times people people would be suggesting things, and then I would say something, and then other people would say that or take that as, well, like they wouldn't feel comfortable arguing with me, and sometimes having a person who is comfortable coming to you and having that task conflict and having that that hard discussion when other people don't feel comfortable doing that. And I think that he definitely highlights that in the book where there was somebody who it was the Pixar example that they talk about in the book. Having somebody that would go off and collect the other people's ideas and take that back and be the person arguing for that if you didn't feel comfortable raising something like that. And I learned afterwards that how you are perceived takes a huge precedence over people's willingness to engage with arguments with you, and that if someone isn't confident in whatever they're suggesting, that can they're not going to feel confident coming out and arguing past just saying the argument. And as soon as you hear it, you digest it, and you kind of start trying to feel out the boundaries of that, that can really shut a lot of people down. And that was a weird discovery for me, and not one that I take lightly, because that's I don't like shutting people down. I want to hear dissenting voices. I want to be challenged.
Yeah, that really resonates for me in my experience too. And I've learned that I know that I've handled things all wrong when I think we're going at a task conflict, but they think that it's a relationship conflict, or vice versa. I've had it both ways, but having something intended to be a task conflict that degenerates into a relationship conflict means that I haven't done the work necessary to build the relationship on which you can have the task conflict. Like, one is a foundation for
so I wonder if there is something to that translates, like if you are in an environment where you can separate yourself from the emotional, like not make the whatever you're arguing about a part of your identity, and keeping that, whatever that is, at arm's length, and that if you can do that, if that translates to, like, if John, you and I had conversations, task conflicts all the time, and then maybe Eric and I had never met, and I go off and start talking to him, if he's equally good at task conflict and that kind of thing, and keeping ideas and emotions out of stuff, that I can immediately have that trust foundation. Does that build across those conversations? Or
well, you and me is one relationship, and you and Eric is a different one. And while they have you in common, that's essentially two completely different contexts.
No, I was just going to agree.
Okay.
I agree that they are separate, but does the fact that we are both, or all three of us, are kind of task conflict oriented, does that implicitly mean that whatever arguments that we're going to have are going to stay task?
I think no. Honestly, no? I think because I am going to be very clear in saying that I'm not beyond or having a relationship conflict. That that shit happens. I mean, like no matter how much I, try to stay in a certain frame of mind, somebody else might not be, or I might be having an off day. I've got, ups and downs.
That's a good point.
Else. And the thing kind of sneaks up on me. What I have learned is how to recognize it after it's in the room.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't learned how to prevent it altogether. You use some interesting language around like removing emotion from it or keeping emotion at arm's length. And I think I've heard similar language too from other, business leaders talk about that. I've had like managers, directors type people talk about like that person's too emotional or they've brought emotion into it. And I always bristle a little bit of that because it's impossible to take emotion out of it. It's not about removing emotion as much as it is about catching emotion and working with it. It's always a force in the room.
Yeah. Would you say, John, I think what you're getting at is it's just really important to be self-aware.
Yes.
And emotionally intelligent enough to know what else is going on in the room.
Yeah.
So I think there's kind of two forces. One is, from my skull in, like I need to know, am I getting emotionally invested in this? And part of that is being self-aware enough to know that based on the rest of my environment, I could be at different emotional states.
Yes.
There's a big tie physiologically between how much stress I'm under, how much sleep I've had, even my nutrition into my emotional state. And so I need to realize like, man, am I getting worked up? And like, I've got a friend, he told me one time he knows on his Apple Watch what his resting heart rate is, or like what his normal resting heart rate is and his normal meeting heart rate. And like, he'll look at his Apple Watch and be like, oh man, I may be getting a little more worked up than I thought I was.
That's a hell of a bit of tangible feedback.
Yeah. And I just thought, man, that's really interesting. And in his role, he ended up being in some more emotionally charged situations. But I think the other part is appreciating that about everyone else and understanding what the emotional reactions are to changes in the team.
Yeah.
I was involved a couple years ago in a project that was moving some resources from on-prem to the cloud and was getting some pushback I didn't expect until I realized that the client we were working with, there were people whose job in the past had been to like put sticks of RAM in servers, right? Or replace hard drives when they're coming to the end of their life. And they weren't concerned that the cloud wasn't going to give us the performance or price characteristics. They were concerned that maybe their job wasn't going to be what it was. And there was insecurity and there was just uncertainty. And so that meant that they were necessarily being a little more emotionally invested in this decision.
Yeah.
And to their credit, like they worked through that and they saw that, yeah, there's different skills, but I didn't really ever like crawling into the server room anyway, things like that. So appreciating the emotional state of the people around us and how that impacts decisions. One of the things that was interesting a couple of years ago, I was put on a team where there were actually 3 of us that were on the new team that had been the tech lead on our previous team. And the other 2 gentlemen, I didn't know as well. I knew enough about them to know that we weren't going to see eye to eye on 100% of things. And I told my boss, like, the first thing I need before this project starts, I need to get barbecue with these guys. And that I knew enough about the other guys, like, this is the food that we're all going to enjoy. And the whole point of that meeting was just to establish relational rapport, because I needed the 3 of us and honestly the broader team as well, but specifically the 3 of us. I needed the 3 of us to have enough relational capital that we knew when we were having task conflict that it wasn't relational conflict. Like, and time proved it out. Like, we ended up being pretty good friends and are pretty good friends. But like going into that, knowing that there was going to be emotionally charged situations, like, yeah, okay, and I didn't have that language. I wish I had this language for it at that time. I knew we were going to disagree on things, but I needed us to take that disagreement and make it productive to the eventual architecture of that application, not, drawing up sides and flinging potatoes at each other.
Definitely.
So in reading this, one of the applications I was thinking of, and I want you guys to tell me if I'm wrong about this.
You're wrong.
Task conflict is healthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the traditional team formation or the phases of team development, right? We go through forming, storming, norming, and performing. But this idea of task conflict and relationship conflict, I think, becomes important, especially in the storming phase of team formation.
Yes.
Because I think I have been a part of this where we've been wrong in both directions. Whereas a new team, and we didn't want any conflict. And probably put ourselves in situations where the best ideas never got aired because I or someone else didn't want to look like they were conflicting.
Mm-hmm.
And I've definitely been on the other side where in the storming phase, there was task conflict that was interpreted as relationship conflict, and it got the project off to a rocky start because people thought that they weren't getting along, and actually maybe they got along more than they thought they would.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, do you think, am I right that identifying task conflict versus relationship conflict is a key to successfully navigating the storming phase of team formation?
I think 100%. Yes. Yeah. Because it's conflict, healthy, well navigated conflict that will even take you out of forming, put you into storming, and you can't get out of storming until you master conflict. That's what your norms are. Your norms, when you norm, you have started to resolve some conflicts and say, okay, this is how people like us do things like this. This is how our team operates. Those are the norms. And then once the norms are in place, then you perform. So it's the exact mechanism of healthy conflict that takes you through those things. Your description of not wanting to have any conflict, that's the marker of the forming stage, is everybody's got their manners on, everybody's sort of tiptoeing around each other. And you can see a team like that if you don't know what you're looking at. If you could see, okay, all these people are being so polite and they agree on everything. This must be a performing team. And you're dead wrong. It's like a baby team.
Yeah, if you can't disagree or you're shutting down, or if people aren't disagreeing or aren't voicing different opinions, I feel like they aren't in a psychologically safe position to be disagreeable and potentially worse. And I think he calls it out in here that there is a huge difference between being disagreeable and being agreeable, in that you can, like, if someone is on my project and they are just being agreeable because they don't care enough to be disagreeable with me, like either it's they don't care about the project, or they don't like working with me, like whatever that issue is, that's like apathy is, I think, a big player in there. And that's a sign that I have become. I always look out for, because usually that person is has ideas, and sometimes they just need to be called out and say, "Hey, I want to know your ideas. Like, I don't want you to be agreeable with me just to be agreeable. Let's get to a better spot."
Yeah. Yeah, the psychological safety aspect of this is huge. I mean, one of the other counterintuitive things that you want to hear from a healthy team is complaints. You know, you might if you have a team that that is constantly complaining about things, either about each other or about the company or the software or something like that. If you hear a constant stream of complaints, what you've got is a psychologically safe environment because they know that they're allowed to, you know, point out things that are wrong, and there are always things wrong in any given environment.
But is the complaint really the right voice for those ideas?
No, probably not. But it's a symptom of a healthy energy, a healthy environment with which you can go in and, you know, manage with that team and work with that team, knowing that you're getting the info. I think that's my point, is that you can redirect those complaints. If they're not productive, you know, complaints, they're at least something there that you can grab hold of and try to steer.
But would you agree that the complaints are useful when they're task complaints and not relational complaints? Like if I'm just complaining, like, man, I am stuck on a project with Brock again, and he just wants to watch Top Gear every day, right? Like if that's my complaint, I don't know that that's indicative of the right form of psychological safety.
No. Well, okay, the right form of psychological safety, but you've had the safety to say something at all.
Yes.
Think about the alternative. The alternative is you keep those things bottled up. You keep it to yourself that you don't like being on a team with Brock, that, you know, he's always watching Top Gear and he chews like an animal. And sorry.
You know, we were going to talk about that on the air.
But if you kept that inside, and if it was, you know, like more than a passing thing, if this was a recurring thing for you that you were suppressing, that would come out in other unhealthy ways, whether, you know, task or relationship or something. And the fact that you've been able to express it means we have a chance at navigating.
Yeah, and steering it. Yeah,
even just you rubber ducking yourself and saying, you know, if that just came out of you in a one-on-one or something, never mind if your manager swoops in and helps you or doesn't, but you've said it out loud to yourself, and it might make you realize something you didn't before. But out loud is always better in terms of can we move forward from this?
Yeah, I think so too. Like that's really difficult to. I'm not sure how one would necessarily steer the relational conflict, a relationship conflict, toward more of a task conflict situation. But knowing that that is a thing, at least it's something that you can work to address and overcome and help get people seeing eye to eye, and hopefully steering them in the direction of how to be more task conflict oriented. And I one last thing I want to call out on this is there's a part in here that, like, I can't tell if I am. I can't decide if I'm just feeling very seen, or if I am being called out publicly. But it goes. Here's a section here that says disagreeable people tend to be more critical, skeptical, and challenging, and they're more likely than their peers to become engineers and lawyers. They're not comfortable, or they're not just comfortable with conflict. It energizes them. And man, that that is so true. Yeah. I'm thinking I'm feeling more seen than called out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's when you've been able to have a conflict and work through it in a healthy way, and nobody really got seriously hurt, nobody died, nothing was ruined. When you come out the other side of that thing that could be scary going in, um, I think there's an exhilaration that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a you're not scared of the next conflict that you might wade into, and you see that you didn't not only did we not get hurt, but we also moved forward and we're all stronger on the other side of it. And that's something that, I mean, I'm definitely on the same page with that, is that it feels like I like getting called out. I like engaging in a healthy conflict, because I know I have confidence, I guess, that I can come through the other side of it with the other person.
And smarter.
When I think good task conflict, good debate sharpens your ideas.
Yeah.
We did a nerd lunch a couple years ago, if you guys remember this, where it was Canopy versus Cypress. And you have to remember, Cypress was still relatively new at that time, so it was more of a worthwhile debate, because even now I would concede that Cypress is the right tool to use, but at that time I was still arguing for Canopy. And
Canopy being the F# front end to Selenium,
right,
sort of testing tool. Yeah.
And so one of the really fun things about that, and we did a nerd lunch that was a debate, and really that was like a debate that like carried into a nerd lunch, like we were having that debate. But I will say that like that whole exercise sharpened some of my ideas. It like showed me like some of the rusty washers that were in my thought process. Like, oh yeah, like there are parts of Selenium and by extension Canopy that are a little long in the tooth, and yeah, I really can't defend it from that spot. Like I lost ground there, and that's fine. And I don't know. I wish there were more forums like that where we could have respectful, intellectual debates about technology and process and all these things that we do.
Actually, that's what we're doing here. So,
No, it's not.
Yeah, I think it would be a riot to have an entire tech conference, like a single track tech conference that was just a series of debates.
Yes. That's a marvelous idea.
Well, I've floated this idea to a couple people, and I've been told that there's no way you would get through the day without personality conflict.
Duh.
But
yeah.
Bring your big boy pants.
Yeah.
No, that's sexist. I won't say that. But like, I wonder also in the context of an organization that considers itself a learning organization. You mentioned that you reminded me that this conflict originated maybe in a team where work was being done and a choice had to be made, and then we brought it to a more shared forum where people could engage in debate or just show up with popcorn. And I wonder if that might be a healthy ongoing mechanism for a learning organization, is to just have a forum that you can do that, because there's going to be those conflicts, there's going to be those disagreements, and we could just like, let's take a vote on the team. Should we take it into the ring and let the company help us with this, and then kind of spread. Yeah, I think that would be a neat thing to do as an ongoing activity inside of a group, an organization.
Yeah, and I will say, at the end of that nerd lunch, I think we were on Zoom. I think we polled the audience.
Yeah.
Say, okay, who won? And I lost. But even that was educational, because some people said like why they preferred Cypress over Canopy, and like, okay, well, that is an interesting data point. And I don't know, take your drink, Brock. Being an F# fan, like I didn't realize how much of a hindrance that was for some people. And
Yeah.
like that was educational for me to see what other people prioritized and what other people thought they could be productive in. So I lost, but I learned. I lost the debate, but I came away smarter than when I went into it.
You also probably turned a lot of people on to Canopy and F Sharp,
Mm-hmm.
even if the poll results didn't show it.
Yeah.
You sharpened right back.
I F sharpened right back.
Yeah, watch your mouth.
All right, my friends. Well, I think we are at time. Any last comments before we wrap up for today?
If it's your first day at Good Fight Club,
You better come with arguments.
you have to pick a fight.
I like that one. I like that.
Go pick a fight.
Go pick a fight.
And then you'll realize that the answer the whole time was it depends, and then you'll make millions as a consultant.
All right. Well, maybe we should wrap up or have an addendum on our standard closing, which is stay curious and pick fights.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah, we're just gonna keep growing this sign off. I love it.
Yeah. I
Stay
love it.
curious, pick fights. For
All right. See you guys.